I think most people today inside the church, pastors and just church members themselves, recognize that there is a lack of true spiritual holiness in the church. I think even the enemies of Christianity outside the church, they look oftentimes at the testimony of Christians and they see very little difference between the life of a Christian and their own life. Because of that, you often hear words such as hypocrite. And I think that even though we should be very, very careful not to be motivated or coerced by the world, we need to recognize something. There is some hypocrisy in the church, and oftentimes it has to deal with the idea of holiness. Now, what is holiness actually? Well, holiness involves two things. It involves coming out of those things that displease God, but not just stop doing the things that God disagrees with, but also to stop doing them in order to run to God, in order to have fellowship with Him. One of the things that's probably most important that the Bible reveals about God is that He's holy. Now, what does that mean? A lot of people think that the holiness of God means that He is without sin. Well, that's part of the idea, but that's not the primary idea. You see, the sinlessness of God, the perfections of God, have to deal more with His righteousness. Holiness has to deal with His separateness, His transcendence, that there is no one like God. There is no one holy like the Lord. He is totally and completely unique from the rest of His creation. And not only that, but He's higher than His creation, and He's of more worth than all His creation combined. For a man to be holy is to recognize that God is transcendent, that God is deserving of all glory, of all honor, of all praise, of all service. To be holy is when a man recognizes the value of God and lives in light of that. And because he sees God as so valuable, so precious, so beautiful, so glorious, he's willing to leave not only bad things, but also things that are good but not as good as God. He's willing to leave those in order to devote his heart entirely to God. Now, the question is, how can we become more holy? Well, I think the answer is simple. We can become more holy by having a greater and greater understanding of the greatness of God. One of the reasons why the church is suffering today is because there's an ignorance of the knowledge of God. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you heard a year-long preaching series on the attributes of God? When was the last time you studied the Bible to learn the attributes of God? Most people in our churches today don't even know who God is, and therefore they cannot esteem His value. And they will not separate themselves to Him in service. Holiness means simply this, that you recognize how valuable God truly is, and you turn away from everything else, and you give your heart to Him in service, in devotion, in seeking out His will, and then seeking to do that will. A lot of people think holiness has to do with measuring how long your dress is, or how long the sleeves are on your shirt, or wearing some kind of covering on your head. And if people do that, I'm not against them for that. I appreciate any attempt they might make to be holy. But what you need to understand is this: holiness is more than just some legalistic set of rules. It is a heart that esteems God and is on fire for Him. Now, one other thing that I want to say about holiness is if your heart is truly devoted to God, you're going to want to do the will of God. And it is the will of God that you grow, the Bible says, in sanctification. If we truly have given our heart to God and we truly esteem Him above everything else, it's going to affect the rest of us. We have to admit that we live in a culture that's very sensual. Very, very sensual. And we have to also admit that much of that sensuality has made its way into the church. Here's something that I would like you to see. That if you're holy on the inside, You're going to want to be holy on the outside. And if you've given your heart to God truly, then you're also going to give Him your mind, your eyes, your ears, your face, your hands, your feet, your body. You're going to seek to conform everything you are to the standard of His